So we know that screens are really a defining feature of life today for all of us, but they're a particularly strong and defining feature of social life, entertainment, consuming material goods, and education for teens and who are anywhere from 13 to 19, and for emerging adults as well, and some older middle schoolers, 12-year-olds, we can say. We want to remember that virtual reality is their reality. It's not different or separate from in-person communication. It's all one, under one bucket of social life, of interacting, of having friends. Now, a study just came out. Can I turn my volume up? Yes. Hold on a second. Let me do that. Okay, my volume is pretty far up, so are you having trouble hearing me now? Is that better? I can also speak louder, so let me know if that's better. So there's a very interesting study that just came out on July 26th by some researchers, and the lead author on this study is a man called Jason Nagata. And this study has been mentioned in Newsweek and other news outlets. And essentially, the title of their study is so fascinating: Contemporary Screen Time Modalities and Disruptive Behavior Disorders in Children. So here's what they found. When examining the thresholds, like exposure to more than 4 hours of total screen time per day, there was an association with a higher prevalence of conduct disorder, 69%, and oppositional defiant disorder, 46%. This is very interesting in terms of the ADHD world because we know that already ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder, which I really believe is a relationship problem, because a person is oppositional in relation to someone or something. It's already occurred. It already co-occurs about 40% of the time. So what this study is showing is that in almost half of the participants, they were more likely to demonstrate the signs of oppositional defiant disorder by using screens. And so I'm curious if we're talking about kids with ADHD who are, 40% of them, 40% of the kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, around 10%, already have oppositional defiant disorder, then this is means that more of them are more likely to get it, to develop the symptoms of it, just like any kids. But because of the proclivity, the tendency, the rate is even higher. Now, I don't have a statistic for you on that, but it's just kind of looking at these numbers and thinking about what that means for kids with ADHD and co-occurring oppositional defiant disorder. One of the findings from this study that was so interesting is that 1 hour on social media is linked to a 62% higher rate of a behavioral or mental health condition. Wow, that is really incredible, right? That's amazing. And the author of this study, Dr. Nagata, found that adolescents are so attached to their phones that nearly 50% of them said that they lose track of time. Now, we know that time management, hyperfocus, distractibility, all traits of ADHD already occur. And then if we add in this new study and the statistics from this new study, that means that kids with ADHD are at an even higher risk of behavioral or mental health condition. Interesting, this idea that you can be so attached to your phone that almost 50% of them lose track of time. Now, for kids with ADHD who already struggle with feeling time, understanding what time is, this is a serious, there's some serious implications from this study. Now, we know that social media is where today's teens meet and hang out. And separating kids from their phones can actually result in social isolation and alienation from peers. So when a lot of parents come to me and they're like, I'm taking the phone away because blah, 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 and their kids become almost hysterical. Please don't do that. Don't take my phone away. I need my phone. That's how I connect with my friends. That is actually true. So how can we teach, what I would call a healthy media diet? How can we teach responsible screen behaviors to our teens? What teens need is guidance for managing apps and meeting places online, for using screens effectively for something like studying or researching, manage and not multitasking, which that I want to talk about. We're going to talk about later this fall, but actually how to stick with what you're doing. And rather than switching from one thing to another, because another study came out that said that people with ADHD lack the capacity for that kind of flexibility. And so while media multitasking doesn't exist in any of our brains, it's particularly hard for people with ADHD. So let's talk a little bit about teens. So teens are interested in social status, peer acceptance, and friendships. They need each other as they shift away from the primary focus of family to paying more attention to the outside world and who they are in that outside world. They're developing what I call connected independence, right? They still are connected to the family, but they're also learning to stretch those muscles and make decisions on their own and be in the world and hang out with friends and develop the maturity that they need to be effective adults. So there's a lot of pressure on the platforms and social media to act in certain ways, to say things in a particular way, and above all, to express loyalty to the group that's on that platform or that's participating in whatever conversation is going on. We also see what happens is that there's a group think that develops. So now this entity online has a way of interacting and thinking about things, which put pressure on individuals to, to silence their personal ideas or personal morals or priorities in service of that group mind, right? The group blobby mind. So this means teens will say and do things online that don't actually reflect who they really are in private or what they actually believe. And if you really want a great example of this and information about this, and there was a CNN special several years ago, it is still relevant today, called Being 13. You can watch it on YouTube or maybe in the CNN archives. I highly recommend it. It's very, very interesting and enlightening, and frankly, a little bit eye-opening. So what we're seeing is that teens are defining themselves based on the numbers of likes that they have and saying things via text or social media that they wouldn't feel comfortable speaking in person. And these are examples of irresponsible digital footprints. I'm leaving my digital footprint by saying this or doing this or posting this picture of myself at a party, and I'm not really thinking about what the long-term consequences of that are, which for teens would have to do with college admissions or job or potential employers who will look you up online and see what your story is. So these kinds of uses of social media really can negatively affect self-understanding and relationships. So this issue of unrealistic expectations that teens and adults have about themselves based on comparisons to others that they see on social media is a very common and profound source of self-criticism, self-degradation, and low self-esteem. Kids will denigrate themselves. Adults will do this too. They may feel jealous of things they see on social media. You know, I was recently, to log on to here on Facebook, I was logging on and there was a woman that I know who's, in Greece with her son and what a great time they're having. And her partner, she's biking, from Maine to Florida. And I was like a little jealous, like, I'd like to be on Santorini. That looks fun. So we all do that. We all do this kind of comparison. And it's natural to compare yourselves to others and look for similarities and contrasts when you're a teen. That's part of your identity formation. Now, I'm curious to ask you, people who are here today, how many of you compare yourselves to others? And do you come out on top and feel good about yourself? Or do you tend to come out underneath that person or on the bottom? You come up short. A lot of us do this. I do this sometimes. I bet you do. So how many of you, tell me if you do this, and then when do you recall doing this? Like, do you do this every day? When did you just start doing this? I'm really curious about this pattern of comparison. I call this compare and despair. And this compare and despair behavior is inherently linked to social media platforms, time on social media, and the criticism that you may put on yourself as a result of seeing what other people are doing and asking yourself why you're not. So let's see. I have a couple questions here. Lynn says, yes, I compare myself and I don't measure up. Anybody else? Dorothy says, what if the school system doesn't support all the lovely information you share with us? Well, what I would suggest, Dorothy, all those lovely information, what I would suggest, Dorothy, are two things. One is send them to this recording of this Facebook Live. Maybe hire me to come and do a training for your school system, or check out the Attitude Library. Bashor, so that's Eman, hi. On a personal level, I sometimes put myself lower. Yeah, I'm trying to change my thinking from imposter syndrome to growth mindset, recognizing that I may not know as much as someone else, but that I could learn it. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for saying that, because that's exactly what we want to do for ourselves, but it's also what we want to teach our children and our teens. How can they go from thinking they're just faking it and someone's going to discover who they really are underneath to having a growth mindset? I may not know this, that's okay. I may stumble, that's all right. I'm going to try to learn it. Lynn says, started a long time ago, pressure from my family to be a better comparison to my twin, and she does not have ADHD. So Lynn, thank you for sharing this. I think twins are a particularly difficult situation when one has ADHD and one does not. It could be a gender difference as well. That kind of pressure can also happen in families where you're not a twin, but someone has a sibling who doesn't have ADHD and you do, and so there's a natural source of comparisons. I do want to put out that I have a downloadable for you. Oops, sorry, that is not it. Let me get it. About this topic. So I'm going to put that in the chat right now so you can all access this. And it'll be in the notes of the show notes also. Melanie, if we could do that, that would be great. So teenagers who suffer from low self-esteem or mild depression are more likely to make frequent social comparisons, as are adults, honestly. So when you don't feel good about yourself, it's easier to compare yourself negatively to someone else. Sometimes social comparisons can be motivating and inspiring, but sometimes they can be really dispiriting or judgmental. And they've been, as I said, associated with depression. Using social media for this process of of comparison has been found to have a significant downside in a study by White and Langer. And what they found is that using social media for these kinds of comparisons results in lower self-esteem, poor self-image, and well-being, your well-being that's kind of threaded with envy, guilt, blame, and lying. So I'm curious, what types of comparisons do you notice in your teens, those of you who are parents, or in your friends or your partners, those of you who are not? Daniel, hi. I think I do this a lot when I compare myself to others, which leads to being hard on myself, which causes negative thoughts, but can be reflective. Right. So this is very interesting. Thank you for saying that. That, we can compare ourselves to others, and in that process of comparison, we are using self-awareness. We are practicing metacognition. How do I not just think about my thinking, but how do I think about myself? And so in that aspect of it, it is reflective. But it does mean that we're often harder on ourselves. And that's a pattern that we would like to shift. So what types of comparisons do you make, or do you notice your team makes? Hi, Matt. I don't see any comments here. I'd love to see some comments. Any comments about the types of comparisons you might be making to yourself or things that you see your teens doing? Anybody? Okay. Well, put it in the chat when you have a chance. So our goal here is to aim for a balanced media diet, to shift the belief that screen use is a right versus screen use is a privilege. So those of us who were born before this thing was invented, and there are many of us online here, understand that there was a whole life that we led without a phone, and that having a phone actually is a privilege. It's not a right. It doesn't come out of the womb with you. It's something that you earn by demonstrating your ability to manage screens appropriately, to get on and off them, to go to sites that are, geared towards someone your age with your values, that you use the screens in ways that you feel that you would feel proud of telling your parents or your grandmother, instead of ways that you're trying to hide and sneak around. So let's see, Lynn says one of the things that she tells herself in terms of comparisons is, I'm not organized. So other people are more organized than I am. E-Man, in my work, engaging and monitoring youth presence on Facebook, I see guys post a lot about what they're doing, and girls post pictures of themselves and outfits. Right, so there's a lot of pressure online, thank you, E-Man, for women in particular about how we look, and for teens. There's a lot of image conscious stuff. I have a client who has a very active Instagram account. This is a former client, and there were all kinds of very sexy shots of them, and it was hard for their parents to see that, and it was hard for their parents to understand how they're choosing to put themselves out in the world in this sexualized way. Let's see, Kara, teens out having fun, smiling, happy with family. And I can barely get mine to hang out at all. Yeah. So when you see other families who are like, oh, look what we're doing, and oh, isn't this fun? And your kids are really pushing up against you, maybe being, disrespectful or short with you, or not even wanting to talk to you at all. It's very painful to see that online, because it feels like your flaws, your limitations, your quote unquote failures are right in your face. Let's see. So I hear you, Kara. I really do. Dorothy, mostly that others seem to be happier. For example, he thinks that everyone else is happier because they play gaming 18 hours a day and stay up late. Right. So that's a like a false perception of what's going on. Now, there may be people who are gaming 18 hours a day and he is losing out because he can't, but that doesn't, that doesn't mean they're necessarily happy, or they may actually be addicted. Matt, my ADHD doctor is off the planet and has been for quite some time. At the age of 17, okay, maybe it's your, I don't quite understand. I think that's a typo. Sometime at the age of 17, self-diagnosed with treated with marijuana instead of Ritalin. I'm 34 and now have a marijuana problem, but I still know what I should be doing, but stuck in a trap. I have anxiety and depression, but I still soldier on the daily. Nothing stops me. I'm just really stuck. I hear you, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot of people self-medicate with marijuana instead of the psychotropic medication, the Ritalin class, or the dexedrine salt, or the Adderall class, or non-stimulants. And what happens is that this occurs, that you can become an addict to marijuana, using marijuana all the time to sort of turn the volume down on your anxiety and depression. But what it's doing is it's actually affecting your whole brain, and it's not targeted to the dopamine receptors or the serotonin receptors that really manage ADHD and anxiety or depression. So I don't know if there is an ADHD doctor near you, or a prescriber, or if you could talk to your primary care doctor about that, and perhaps consider joining NA, or some group online that can help you reduce the usage of marijuana. Good for you for soldiering on, though. Cassandra, I try to keep from making comparisons, and I try to keep my daughter from doing the same. I deal with imposter syndrome. I don't want her to fall victim to this, always waiting for others to figure out she isn't as capable as she thinks she is. She's capable, she's able, she just has her individual challenges. That's exactly right, Cassandra. That's exactly the kind of message that we want to convey to our teens. And we have to constantly build that up for them, because the world out there, the world in here on the screen, is doing the opposite. And so that's one of the interventions I'm going to talk about later, which is to really notice your strengths, to be able to name and nurture your interests. Deb, seeing others happier isn't necessarily the truth, as I know personally, and their struggles and challenges. Yeah, right. So that's the thing that we want to remember, is that what people post on Facebook is a creation. It's a narrative that they want other people to see. It's not actually the real day-to-day of, oh my God, I have a huge pimple, or I had a horrible fight with my brother. That's not what's posted. What's posted is, other stuff most of the time. Thank you for posting that, Melanie. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so let's keep moving forward. So ironically, so what is a balanced life? Like, what is a balanced life in the digital age? So it includes non-screen activities, such as hanging out with friends in person, doing reasonably well at school or work, engaging in sports or other hobbies, and interests that promote good psychological health. And while many kids and teenagers can do this, and adults as well, those with ADHD, learning disabilities, level 1 autism or anxiety or depression often struggle due to the delay in the prefrontal cortex maturity. So this part right here, where the executive functions really are managed, and challenges with those executive functions. So ironically, so what happens is that because these complex kids have lower amounts of dopamine in their brain, and dopamine is a neurotransmitter that moves along different like highways of the brain and neural pathways, that has to do with interest, pleasure, and reward. And when people don't have enough dopamine, they usually often have ADHD. So this is part of what it means to have ADHD. And so people become totally engaged in digital activities or other high risk, fast reward activities because they generate dopamine very quickly. There's pleasure, satisfaction, and accomplishment. They generate the dopamine that their brains lack. It's harder for them to stop because nothing else seems as fun or captivating or compelling. These kids and teens and adults who are wired differently kind of lack a cause and effect thinking more than their neurotypical peers. So they really can't see or don't believe that certain consequences will happen to them, or that spending time, this much time on the computer, you know, they don't know, they're not paying attention to what they're not doing, because the ADHD brain is a now, not now brain. So now they're getting a lot of rewards, a lot of juices coming here. It's very stimulating. Not now, the homework, the trash that I have to take out, the report I need to write for work, that's later. That I'm not thinking about that. So one of the things that happens with, with social media or games and stuff like that is that they're very appealing because pings and colors, and there are quick tangible levels of achievement that activate the novelty detectors in the dopamine pathways of our brain that manage attention, pleasure, and addiction. So often kids or teens, adults with ADHD or a learning disability autism, anxiety, or other mood disorders may have trouble concentrating or completing tasks they dislike because they're not novel. They're not, that there's no shiny coin, shiny aspect to, brighten you up and say, oh, I want to do that. And but they can perform very well on activities that they do like, because in the process of doing something they like, whether it's online or it's reading, or writing a song, or playing hours of basketball, that pathway in their brain of both interest and reward and pleasure is being fed and is stimulated. So that's why we see kids who can concentrate on the computer, on their game for hours, but can only spend 5 minutes on their homework. Any questions about this so far? Oh yes, Daniel's asking something. I think young people see people's lives are always more positive, but can lead, why is my life not like this? That's exactly right. Or I can't meet my dreams. For example, in Facebook, I thought my friends showing their grades in graduation higher than mine, but I know I work hard, but my ADHD can be prevented. That's why I deleted Instagram, as it was really affecting my well-being and time wasting. Woohoo! Yay! Good for you for deleting it. Thumbs up. I really appreciate your sharing this, and I appreciate your saying that. Sometimes I participate in things where people post numbers like, oh, how many people did you have that came to the summit, or how many followers do you have, or this or that. And I really feel like that's so toxic. In fact, I was at a meeting earlier this week, and we were talking about how to promote an event that was coming up. And someone said, well, we need to get somebody who's a social influencer, because I'm a nobody. And I raised my hand and interrupted. I said, wait a minute. You are not a nobody because you are not a social influencer. Like, those things are not equal. You are a somebody. You are a somebody to all of us. You're a somebody to your friends and your family. You're a somebody at work. And so this kind of confusion about being a somebody because I have followers versus being a nobody because I don't is very misguided, and it's also dangerous because it makes people feel bad about themselves, and it can increase really negative thinking about yourself. So what can we do to help build a healthy media diet for teens and actually for ourselves? So I'm going to talk a little bit about my easy on, easy off method. So the first thing that we want to do as if we're parents is, and if you're not and you're struggling with this, is to notice your relationship to technology. Most adults are constantly tuned into their devices. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm, waiting for the train or I'm in line at the grocery store, everybody's on their phone. Nobody, it used to be, sorry, I'm gonna date myself here, but 15 years ago, that you'd kind of talk to the person who was next to you, like, hey, what are you, how are you? Or wow, that a good item, at the grocery store, or where are you going? Have a conversation. Um, and now people don't do that. And so I think that increases a kind of alienation. So most people are tuned into their own devices. And Alva, who's 13, told me the thing that I really don't like is when my father says, get off your phone. But what are they doing? They're on their phones watching dancing bird videos or on their Facebook or their Instagram. When, we're hanging out in my bedroom before I go to bed, I want them to talk to me, and they're, doing Wordle. So when we sort of peel back the layers, actually, we have to look at ourselves and our patterns first. We need to model the behavior that we want to see. So limit your online time to when your kids aren't around or they're otherwise occupied. Just checking your phone equals checking out to the people you're with or to your children. I was at a dinner recently the other night, and the person was texting, during the meal while we were having a conversation. And that is basically saying something to the people you're with. And what you're saying to those people is like, I'm not so interested in you, or, I'm more interested in communicating with this person than being with you. This is more important. And that can be very hurtful to people. So kids and teens will act out to get your attention. So try to give it first and avoid the drama. So what's the second thing you can do? You can collaborate with your kids to create incentives that motivate. Since everybody dislikes family arguments, particularly about screens, reducing conflict about technology and including kids in your plan to do this increases their motivation and cooperation. That's why collaboration is the third of my 5 C's that I talk about in my book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, and in many articles, videos, and other resources on my website. When you collaborate with your kids, they have more buy-in and there's less nagging from you. That's their experience, that you're nagging them. So talk as a family about what do we want our goals to be for media time. When are we going to have this media time? And if they want 4 hours and you want to give them 1 hour, can you meet in the middle somewhere? With at 2 hours, with that extra hour being designated as earned time only. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So what we want to do when we think about using easy on, easy off, is that we give our kids a certain amount of screen time that is less than what they desire and probably what you think is fair. But they can earn the extra time through good deeds, through cooperation, through doing what needs to be done. Their homework, walking the dog, emptying the trash, participating in life and getting, doing the have-tos before the want-tos. So this bonus time is the incentive, carrot, okay? So you give a certain amount of time with the rest to occur when the homework's completed, or if they transition off their phone without arguing. And not all screens are created equal. So maybe they have an hour on the computer, and they, if they, when you know, maybe they do their homework first, they earn an hour of, you know, gaming, and then if they can transition off their gaming without a fight after dinner, they can have another 30 minutes on their phone. So you want to really incentivize them and work with them. They're not going to thank you, they may not like it, but it's important that you set some sort of predictable pattern to the screen usage. Give them a 15-minute and a 5-minute warning with eye contact, asking them to repeat back what they heard you say, okay? Because at first, getting off, even with yelling, may earn some bonus time because they're getting off. They're not being gracious about it, but they are getting off. And then the next level could be getting off your phone without yelling. So you want to sort of think about what are logical steps for your teen. You know, and if they don't earn the bonus, they don't earn the bonus. But, you know, stop at that. You don't want to go on to tomorrow and next month, and you're going to lose this for 7 years, because it's too much for these kids, okay? It's often really hard for kids to get off their devices. So have a list of alternative activities. They may complain, but they will have something to choose from, and to have that list to look at when they stop what it is that they're doing on their screen. And some of that time can be with you, like we're going to go to the grocery store so you can pick out things you like. I'm going to pause here and answer some comments and questions and come back. So Lynn says, so I spend time watching quilting, scrapbook, crafty sites. However, I do not post anything about me, as I do not know how to do that. How can you walk away from Facebook or Instagram? I think the best thing that you can do is to set a timer, and then set a notification, and maybe set a second timer, so that you hear it, you hear the notification, it gives you a warning, then the timer actually goes off, and then you have a backup timer just in case. But you need to know, just like we do with kids, like, what am I getting off the screen to do? You know, and it might be that, you know, you get off the screen that you were doing and you watch a movie with a friend or a partner. That's, again, not all screens are equal. Yumna, hi, nice to meet you. Is there an alternative theory of framing ADHD other than a delay in the prefrontal cortex? How do indigenous cultures, other more interactive, holistic medical care systems outside the US talk about ADHD? Is it a nomadic type of brain? Is it a nature-oriented brain? I find the current framing isn't helpful because it seeks to assimilate ADHD folks into a normative world. I read a few studies coming out of Poland that speak to the nomadic rather than the ADHD brain. Just asking to see how to shift from the digital world into a world that is more ADHD friendly in a way. So, you know, that's an interesting question. You know, I do come as a clinical psychologist. I do come from a more medical perspective that is neurological. I mean, I think there are all kinds of ways that you can talk about ADHD. You know, outside the box thinkers, or, you know, complex kids, or anything like that. I don't think that actually, you know, using some of the medical model necessarily is about integrating into the normative world, but rather honoring that there is a difference, and there are things that we can do to make a change. Oops, I just lost a bunch of comments. I'm so sorry. Deb says, okay, here we go. I found them. Okay, great. Dorothy says, build good habits. Deb says, we're on our device right now. Ha ha, we are, it's true. Daniel, my parents let me play my PlayStation as a reward. Have that as a reward system. Yeah, so you probably got your reward, Daniel, for doing something that you needed to do, and you earned it. And that's what I like about screens. You know, it's an earned a privilege, rather than, you know, something that you think you're entitled to, like air or food or clothing or shelter or a good education or health care or just love. Deb, we do this, but sometimes it's difficult to be consistent and follow through because of other distractions. Of course, because no one is perfect. So you're doing the best you can with the tools that you have available to yourself in any given moment. And that's what you want to tell yourself. Sometimes, many times I get this right, and sometimes I do not. And you know what? That's okay, because I'm doing the best I can. Thanks for the activity ideas. Great. Cassandra, ADHD is an internet-based disorder. We have an abundance of attention, but struggle to know what deserves our attention in any given moment. But we can pay attention to things that interest us with hyper-focus like none other. That is very true, Cassandra. Thank you. So in the last minute or two, I just want to say a couple things. Where do devices live in your home? The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that electronic media stay out of kids' bedrooms, especially at night. But this doesn't account for families where, a mother, it might be a single family home, and that parent works a night shift and needs their kid to have a phone in their room so that they can contact them in cases of emergency. So you want to really think about what having a phone means and how you're going to use it if you keep it in the room. And to expect pushback. No teen, no child is going to come to you and say, thank you so much for cutting my 8 hours a day of screen time to 4. But give specific positive feedback when they cooperate with the plan that you create, and stick with your plan in spite of pushback. What I encourage you to do is to meet weekly to assess your plan and make any tweaks. That makes sense. So when we're talking about social media and the effect that it has on teen mental health, we want to do some interventions. And these interventions are things that often have to do with creating a growth mindset. So you want to identify what are called islands of competency. What do you or your teen like to do and feel good about doing that is not the screen? Or if it is the screen, can you take that interest and sign them up for a programming class or learning how to build a website? You want to grow this thing that they feel good about themselves, and you see their talent and their competence. You want to pay more attention to strengths rather than challenges, so that we can help build up a conversation in the head, an internal conversation that notices good things, not just deficits. And we're going to notice what's going well. That's that 5th C of my 5 C's. It's celebration, self-control, compassion, collaboration, which we talked about today, consistency, which someone brought up, and celebration. Consistency isn't about perfection. It's about doing the best you can with what you have available, owning it, regrouping, and trying again. You want to help teens define and identify who real friends are and what they say. And because real friends may not be saying the things online that your kids are seeing right now. And I'm just going to put up my downloadable again for you here. You want to help your child spend more time with these people and listen to what they have to say about them. And that might mean, having a family over for dinner, or taking a friend out to do mini golf or get ice cream, so that you're sort of helping nurture a relationship that is a positive one. And finally, as adults, we want to model what it's like to accept ourselves for who we are, warts and all, because none of us are perfect. It's a myth. So talk with your teen, talk with yourself about the ways that you compare your insides to other people's, finely constructed and crafted outsides, right? That's what we want to really identify. Like, how are you comparing yourself to what someone else is showing you? Because what they're showing you may not be what's actually happening underneath. And so it could be a myth. So I don't know if anyone has any more questions or comments, but I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's a very hot day here in New England. And I hope that all of you are getting to enjoy some of the summer in some way. And I will see you again in 2 weeks. So check out my free downloadable, and come back and watch this again. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great evening. Bye.